you're talking to a larger organization, there's definitely a team involved. So what does that team look like? And what are the dynamics that play between the team? Understanding that, getting insight from the salespeople from your sales team is very important in this phase, because it will give you a really good understanding of what those segments are. Some more information that you can use for segmentation would include demographics, pain points, motivations, behavior, maybe geography. There's a whole bunch of different things that you can use. In industry vertical. The key, though, is to make sure that they are sufficiently large groups and they are sufficiently homogeneous. They are mutually exclusive so that you can then map your messaging to each of these individual groups. And that is very important. So you make sure that you've got all these segmentation attributes mapped out to then go to the next and final stage of this process, which would be mapping your content. So aligning the content to these pain points, to the buying stages, to your audience segmentation, to their roles, and figure out what motivates them and what their needs are. Once you've got all this information, it's very important to document it. You create a content map. You do it per stage and per segment. You focus on messaging and content that will push the user, push the prospect to the next stage in the buying cycle. So what information would they need to move forward? What risks, what FUD factors involved that must be overcome for them to move to the next stage. Out of this, you'd get an algorithm. I mean, the screenshot that we have over here is kind of an example of what we have done with a customer recently. You would kind of get this algorithm or this kind of formula for content chunks that you would then assemble, and then this would determine how you would personalize information on your site through your lead nurturing programs and so on. So that's kind of what is very critical, is developing this content map. And once you have that in place, it then becomes very easy to set up your business rules and put it together in the platforms, which I think is what we talk about next with Rolf. So just to summarize, in terms of the process, you're looking at kind of three key things that you need to look at. Understand the buying cycle, who your buyer is, understand the buying stages. Might be different again for B2B versus B2C. Look at different attributes for segmentation, like industry, roles, pain points, motivations, and so on. And then finally define that content map, which would then determine what content you need to create, what content you might need to repurpose, but map that and align that to the different segments, to the different buying stages, and finally address what the customer context is, and so deliver to your customer's expectations. I will now pass it back to Rolf to talk a little about the technology, which is kind of the fourth aspect to this process. The three before were about more about the methodology, but there's a technology aspect to it as well. And I'm going to pass it on to Rolf now to talk about leveraging digital platforms. Rolf?
Thank you, Sean. And before we move on to the next section, where we start to dig into the technology just a bit, I'll ask us to pause for a moment and take a quick poll. We want to understand how many folks out there are currently using a web content management system to support their website. And we'll take about 15 to 20 minutes here. Great. Thank you very much for taking the poll. Sean, can we move on to the next slide, please? So in this section, we're going to be talking about the digital platforms. Of course, it's great to go through the exercise that we just discussed and finally get to the point where we have a content map in front of us We know what topics we're going to write about. We write the content, develop that content for the different channels. But in the end, that content has to make it to the prospect, to the customer, and needs to be in support of moving people through that buying cycle. Now, early in the discussion, we had talked also about the closed-loop engagement cycle. And that's a very important part of what we are trying to automate using these platforms. So closed-loop engagement is something that we've talked about for many years. It's nothing new. People have done it with offline channels as much as they are doing it with online channels. But what we're trying to achieve here is an automated way of doing it, where we can actually perform nurturing by moving people through the buying cycle in an automated manner, where we are not always having to get engaged in a manual approach. And to think of that, as Sean has mentioned earlier, you can think of the closed-loop engagement cycle as a corkscrew, actually overlaying the buying cycle. It continues on until we get to the point of conversion. So one of the things that we'll talk about in this section is how that automation would occur in a multi-channel environment so that we can get the right messages out to the right people at the right time. So let's move on to the next slide and begin to discuss how we approach that. So the three key platforms, as we mentioned earlier, that we're going to look at are the web CMS, and we've done a lot of work with a variety of CMS platforms, one of them being Sitecore, we do a lot of work with, and we've also done integrations with marketing automation systems, specifically in this case between Sitecore and the platform called Eloqua. Now then, we've also have CRM, and we've done integrations with both Microsoft CRM, Salesforce, and a variety of other CRM solutions out there. Together, again, we need to have this common customer view, what we often call a context. And the context changes, of course, as the customer moves through the buying cycle. So that is contextual, where they are, what they're thinking, what their current pain point is. As that moves, we want to adjust and respond to them with the appropriate content. One thing we call this trifecta, if you will, of platforms is a unified engagement platform holistically, because we use this combination, the combination of these three platforms to, in a unified way, deliver messages to our prospects and to our customers. So let's go on to the next slide and take a look at how we go about doing that. Again, the objective here is to automate the engagement cycle. Imagine now the corkscrew as a slinky, if you will, across the top of the buying cycle. We continue to go through the cycle. We present information. They respond to us through the user journey, maybe completing a form, selecting a poll. And that gives us that two-way, that digital dialogue that we're looking for. Once we have that information, then we can act on it. So part of what we've done earlier, and what Sean described, was building this content map. Then we create the content that addresses what we believe is a good model of our customers and our prospects that are out there. And then based on this model we have, we want to make sure that we're speaking to them where we believe their head is at the moment. In doing that, we need to be able to present the content, the right content at the right time to the appropriate people. To do that, we leverage the platforms, these contemporary platforms that we have, tools like Sitecore, tools like Eloqua, that have built-in rules engines that enable us to actually develop rules that work against the profile and attributes that we've captured about these people that have come to our site and responded to our emails. So as we go to the next slide, we'll see how this mechanism works and what we're implementing for our customers.